When Sukanya arrived at her office, she was in for a surprise. Her office was decorated for her birthday. She didn't like it when her birthday was celebrated this way. She wanted everything to be simple, and she would be glad if everyone would forget about this day. It had been 7 years since she started working, and for the first 3 years she managed to hide her date of birth. Her colleagues checked her records, but like many people, the date of birth on the documents was incorrect. The next 2 birthdays fell on weekends, and the last time she took a vacation. But now she couldn't avoid it. She thought that her colleagues forgot about her birthday. However, Anand and Lakshman were looking forward to this day, and Jai Sir, who was also her well-wisher, supported the plans of the 2 men. Although he did not like those who looked at Sukanya with lustful thoughts, he did not want to ruin her holiday. Sukanya felt embarrassed when she saw the cake she was asked to cut. She usually left this tradition for home and remembered that she never did it in other places. But she was touched by the efforts of the employees and succumbed to the general mood. Anand and Lakshman tried to smear cream from the cake on her face and succeeded, but when they wanted to take more liberties, Jaya Sir's glance stopped them. However, they continued to touch her whenever possible, despite her attempts to move away. Sukanya perceived their touch as innocent. Both of them, jumping around her, behaved too relaxed. Lakshman, the more cheeky of the 2, even briefly touched her navel with his fingers. Sukanya suppressed a moan at the touch. None of the other employees noticed this. She felt excitement flare up in her body, reminding her of the morning she spent with her lover Ranjit. Even the innocent touches of her colleagues evoked memories of her strong and powerful man. She smiled, remembering how she completely surrendered to him. She had never allowed herself to do this with other men. But before Ranjit, she was a completely different woman. Thoughts about him ignited passion in her like nothing else. The day at the office passed in a festive atmosphere, and employees continued to joke and maintain a light mood. Sukanya noticed how Jai Sir was having a hard time hiding his irritation at the behavior of her male colleagues. She didn't like it when they made jokes at her expense, although she understood that Jai Sir was being overly protective. She felt safe with him, although she believed that her colleagues were just trying to be friendly and did not pursue other goals. They looked quite innocent in her eyes. After lunch, she went to the archive room to get documents. The office boy twice failed to bring the required file, and she had to look for it herself in a huge stack. She was intently searching for the file when she noticed Lakshman standing nearby. She was surprised and even shuddered slightly, but immediately laughed at her reaction. "Lakshman, sir, I thought it was someone else," she said. He looked at her with his lustful eyes. Did I scare you, dear?" he said. He stood too close to her in the dark, stuffy, and crowded archive room. The summer heat made the air heavy. Lakshman, a little plump and with an expressionless face, was not at all attractive. But Sukanya never looked at him from that point of view. She treated him with respect for his friendliness, unaware that this friendliness bordered on attempts to take advantage of her kindness. He had been trying to drive her into a corner for a long time, and this situation seemed like a godsend to him. Like many men like Lakshman, he overestimated his chances. He smiled, looking into her eyes, and Sukanya realized for the first time that perhaps he was trying to get closer than necessary. As her mind began to process his sexual intentions, she realized more and more that her opinion of him was rather low. He didn't evoke any response from her. She turned to the documents and stopped paying attention to him. "Maybe I can help you, Sukanya?" he asked insistently. "It's okay, sir. I can handle it myself." "Don't worry, I'll find the file," she replied. But he was not one to give up. Accidentally touching her navel while cutting the cake gave him a false sense of courage. He didn't hesitate to slowly rub his finger over her navel as she pulled back slightly and let out a soft gasp along with it. It was a sensitive part of her body, and she couldn't control her reaction. Lakshman noticed her reaction, but did not realize how complex and full of internal contradictions it was. Her emotions regarding physical intimacy were very vague, and even minor touches made her remember her feelings for the other person. This was the moment when her inner confusion intersected with an unexpected sensation. But she expressed surprise to her colleague. He asked, Was that the frosting on the cake? I think this place is just an attention grabber, he said, smiling, and ran his finger over her soft skin near her navel again. Sir, please stop this, she said quietly. Her reaction only made him think more. He wasn't sure how to continue the conversation, but he felt that some innocent flirting could help clear the air. His touch evoked mixed emotions in her, although she tried not to show her embarrassment. What am I doing, Sukanya? I was just kidding, he said, touching her belly button again, but she smiled softly, making it clear that he didn't want to create a conflict. She turned away from him, pretending to be busy searching for the files she needed. She gasped when she noticed his hand accidentally touching her back. He quickly removed his hand, and she pretended that nothing had happened, trying to concentrate on her work. Lakshman thought for a moment as he watched his colleague. This was the woman he had always treated with respect and admiration from the very beginning of their work together. He liked that he could appreciate her hard work and professionalism, admiring the way she copes with all the tasks that are put before her. She noticed his gaze and said quietly, "Please, Lakshman sir, you shouldn't look at me like that." "Sorry, just wondering about your sorry. It's really beautiful as always," he replied, trying to lighten the mood. She was confused for a moment, but did not pay attention to his words, continuing to go about her business. Lakshman stood nearby, watching her search for the required document. He realized that it was better to return to his office and not disturb her. "We shouldn't waste any work time, sir," she said as she continued her search. "Lakshman," a voice thundered in the cold room with records. The man and woman turned to the door and saw Jai Sir standing there, watching them with furious eyes. His appearance resembled that of an angry lion. Lakshman wilted like a weak flower and recoiled from her. He trembled under the gaze of the elderly man, who seemed to burn right through him. I'm sorry, sir. I think I'd better leave." He ran out of the room like a frightened kitten, leaving the old man alone with Sukanya. Sukanya looked at the old man with a feeling of guilt and embarrassment, and he looked at her with rage. He looked like a wounded animal. Seeing his accusing look, Sukanya decided that the moment required an explanation. "I didn't know he was here, sir. I told him to take his hands off me. I said I swear." But the old man's trust in her was already destroyed. With a noisy, irritated sigh, he turned on his heel and left. Sukanya felt very depressed about the way things turned out. This elderly man was a good friend to her, and now he looked at her with such disappointment. She returned to the office with a required file. The old man didn't even look at her. She felt angry at Lakshmana, but most of all she blamed herself for allowing herself to be touched by him. She shouldn't have had sex with Ranjit. This act ignited the fire of lust within her. She tried to talk to the old man about work matters, but his answers were short and dry. He didn't even look at her at these moments. It seemed like he didn't want to see her around anymore. He used to treat her like the office darling, but now he acted like he wouldn't mind if she disappeared off the face of the earth. After lunch, Lakshman said that he had some work to do at home and left. He avoided the old man but tried to talk to Sukanya, but she no longer supported him. Her birthday was turning into her darkest day, and she hated it. Sukanya decided that she would explain herself to the old man. After the end of the working day, when everyone had left, she waited until he finished work. When Jai finished his business and went out to the parking lot, Sukanya followed him and called out, Sir, can I see you for a moment?" He stopped at his scooter and, without even looking at her, asked, "What's happened?" "I want to explain what happened this morning." "I don't." The old man answered rudely. "I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't care." Sukanya cowered in shame at his anger. "Sir, please listen to me. I need to go home. I have things to do. Shall I give you a lift?" The last question sounded like a formality, an ordinary farewell. Having made up her mind at that moment, Sukanya replied, "Yes, sir, please give me a ride home." The old man was confused for a moment, but sighed heavily. He didn't want to talk to her, but he nodded. All the way Sukanya wanted to talk to him about the incident, but the noise on the roads did not allow it. She couldn't explain herself properly while sitting behind him. His behavior didn't change. Her hand, placed for support on his shoulder, made him feel uncomfortable, and she pulled it away. But he said hoarsely that she could hold on to avoid an accident. There was concern in his rudeness. However, he maintained a tense posture when she accidentally touched him while moving. Despite her efforts to keep her distance, her breasts were touching his back, and Sukanya was burning with shame. Jai attributed this to the unevenness of the road and the movement of the scooter. When they arrived at her house, he dropped her off and was about to leave. Sukanya said, "Sir, please come in for tea." "No, I'm not interested. Please don't leave like that. I have to go." He was about to drive away when she grabbed his wrist. "Sir, please don't leave like that. You don't even give me a chance to explain myself. And please don't leave me on a day like this." Jai softened at her last words. It was her special day. He understood that he was making her life difficult. He nodded and followed her into the house. When she brought the tea, Sukanya said, "I'm sorry about what happened this morning." He was about to say that he didn't care about her actions, but this phrase awakened something in him. "If you apologize, it means you did something bad." "I swear, sir, no. I don't know why Lakshman sir did this." The old man did not answer. He drank his tea in silence, looking at something on the wall that didn't matter at all. "What should I do to make you believe, sir? I didn't have any bad intentions in this situation. I don't know how to explain it to you." The old man continued to look at the wall without answering. His gaze was that of a man who had been betrayed. Sukanya shed tears and said, "I am sorry that I disappointed you, sir. I really am a very bad person, and I was wrong about everything, even about the incident this morning." The old man said in a quiet voice, "You are not bad, dear. You are a good lady. But I know that you have nothing to do with this morning's incident. It was that worm's fault. But I couldn't digest what I saw. You looked so vulnerable, so tender. You were the same before. But today you looked completely different. I don't know why, but I didn't like it." Sukanya felt relieved that the old man was not angry with her. She ran up to him and sat down next to him, hugging him. She never did this. Jaya was also overcome with emotion. He awkwardly patted her on the back as she cried a little. "I'm very sorry, sir. I hurt you." "It's okay, Sukanya. I'll take care of the worm." "Sir, please don't. He's not such a bad person. It's probably his emotions he can't control." Jai smiled at her beautiful nature. "Do you want to see what my husband gave me?" She brought the sari that Ramesh gifted her and placed it on the teapot while they both looked at it. But Jai felt something different. The way the lady touched him did not go unnoticed. She was exceptionally beautiful, and it was brought up in him that he was still a man. He was about 57 years old, and he didn't know why, but he was attracted to this beautiful woman. He knew it was wrong to think that way about women other than his wife. But he treated this creature completely differently. He stood casually next to her and slowly placed his hands on her bare hips. She gasped and stopped talking. Her sexy aura, which had engulfed her since the morning, began to shine again. She looked at him as he slowly turned her towards him. The gentlewoman in front of him looked so innocent, so vulnerable, and so weak. She looked like a lamb to him. He ran his finger over her skin. Sukanya let out a deep moan. "Sir," she shouted. She looked into his eyes and felt that she was losing control of herself. Their connection was so strong that his mere touch made her tremble. He saw her chest rise and fall with each breath. His hands began to slowly massage her thighs, and she responded to his caresses. Her breathing became ragged, but she didn't try to stop it. She felt that there was some kind of mutual understanding and trust between them. "You are very beautiful, dear," he said, looking into her eyes. Sukanya felt a growing excitement. Her eyes, overcome with emotion, met his gaze. He slowly ran his hands over her waist, pulling her closer to him. She gasped as she felt his power and closed her eyes, letting the emotion take over her. He kissed her neck, his hands gently touching her back, and her breathing became increasingly uneven. She pressed herself close to him, feeling protected in his arms. Her heart beat faster and faster, and she felt warmth and closeness that overwhelmed her, creating an atmosphere of indescribable unity and trust. She moaned under his touch. "Sir, what are you doing to me?" He slowly pushed her into the bedroom and made her lie on the bed. There was no denial or refusal of his advances on her part. He said slowly, "Take off your blouse." She was stunned when she decided to follow his instructions without any negativity or hesitation. She felt like she wanted to please him, just to please him. The thought of another man experiencing the joy of communicating with her did not in any way make her feel guilty towards her husband. That was the last thing on her mind when she took off her bra. Jai felt shocked. Before him was Sukanya, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He didn't know what prompted him to do this, but suddenly he hugged her and kissed her, and she eagerly kissed her back. Sukanya felt his lips touching her, and felt some special tenderness in that moment. When they pulled away from each other, his hands gently touched her shoulders, and she instinctively responded to his touch, feeling excitement and tenderness. Her emotions overwhelmed her, and she writhed beneath him, lost in her thoughts and worries. Jai adored this moment of intimacy with Sukanya and did not want to interrupt it. He understood that these feelings were something special that united them at this moment. Sukanya felt how his touch gave her confidence and gave her tenderness. She lay beneath him, feeling the warmth of his presence and realizing that this moment was more than just physical attraction. When he looked into her eyes, she smiled, encouraging him to continue. Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by the loud ringing of the phone. Sukanya groaned slightly in disappointment as he picked up the phone, hearing his wife's voice on the other end, asking him why he was late. As he answered, he felt Sukanya hugging him from behind, creating a feeling of special affection and tenderness. He had never imagined Sukanya in this light, and this discovery surprised him and made the moment even more memorable. He got out of bed, buttoned his unbuttoned shirt, and turned off his phone. "Sorry, I have to go," he said as he saw Sukanya getting up from the bed. The lapels of her blouse were undone along with her bra, as her heavenly breasts were on casual display for him. She looked at him with temptation. "Can you spare a few minutes, sir?" she said in a lustful voice. The scene itself was enough to give him a heart attack. He wanted to return to the goddess and finish what he started, but, collecting his leather bag, he headed for the exit. He noticed how the middle-aged housewife buttoned her blouse with a sad sigh, throwing her bra on the floor. Her thick, flowing hair lay over one shoulder, and her natural beauty made him pull her in for a kiss, which she responded to readily. His hands slid over her beautiful buttocks, and she moaned, trying to convince him to stay a little longer and spend time with her in bed. With great difficulty, he pushed her away and walked out to his two-wheeler. Sukanya stood at the entrance to the house, seeing him off with a lustful smile, casually posing in front of him. As he was about to start the vehicle and blow a kiss to her, he heard Ramesh's voice at the main gate of the house. He came up and greeted the old man. "How are you, Jai, sir?" For a moment, the old man thought that Ramesh had noticed the glances his wife and he exchanged. He felt lucky that the call had interrupted their connection, otherwise it would have been difficult to explain. The old man chatted with the man for a while, noticing how Sukanya smiled mysteriously and secretly, happy that their romance remained a secret thanks to a happy coincidence. The woman reignited the excitement in him that he had rarely experienced lately. Sukanya also felt that she had just escaped a bomb explosion at the last moment, but she was still disappointed. Her body had been playing with her since the morning after morning sex with her lover. She was ashamed to feel such a strong attraction to the old man's hands and body. He was clearly taller and stronger than her husband, and she took a guilty pleasure in imagining him possessing her. She reproached herself for these thoughts in the presence of Ramesh, but she could not stop them. Ramesh said, "You should try Sukanya's cooking. You've stopped visiting us completely, sir. Try to have dinner with us sometime." Sukanya and Jai both smiled at her husband's words that he should try her cooking. It almost sounded like he was inviting the old man to try her himself. Soon the old man left, winking at her goodbye. She answered him with an air kiss and was herself amazed at her courage. When she and her husband entered the house, She pulled him into the bedroom and laid him on the bed. Unbuttoning her blouse, she offered him her divine breasts. Ramesh exclaimed, "Oh my God, darling, you look incredible. But what is it? You're without a bra." Sukanya swallowed and said, "I was wearing a bra, honey. But it got into my skin in the morning, and the first thing I did when I got home was take it off." Squeezing her breasts, he replied, "But there was an old man there, my dear. It would be risky." She bit her tongue and said, "He gave me a lift." Ramesh drank tea and left. I thought he had already left, so I changed my clothes. But later he returned with his forgotten bag. Nodding his head, Ramesh said, "It was still dangerous. What would happen if he found out you weren't wearing a bra?" Sukanya giggled, thinking to herself, "He learned a lot more about my breasts, honey." She hated herself for preferring their touch to her husband's. An hour later, she admitted to herself that her thirst had only been temporarily quenched, and thought that her lover Ranjit would have done a much better job. This thought made her laugh. Ramesh had a great time with his sexy wife, making love to her twice in one evening until the kids returned. For some reason, she was especially excited. It was probably their rare intimate moments that made her crave intimacy so much. He loved every moment of their passion. It was reminiscent of the early days of their marriage when they took advantage of every opportunity. Then the initiative came from him, but this time it was different. It was Sukanya who took the initiative. He liked it, and he felt that she had every right to do it because it was a special day for her. When the children returned and household chores came to the fore, Sukanya smiled to herself, remembering her active role in sexual games with her husband. She wondered if he suspected something about her changed behavior. Although Ramesh tried to satisfy her, it was still not enough for her. She felt sorry for her innocent husband, who did not even suspect that she remained unsatisfied. She tried to compensate for this by paying him more attention, laughing at his jokes, helping him, and showing concern. It was a rare time for him to spend with his family. Unlike usual evenings, when he returned home at 9 or 10 o'clock, today he came at 6 and enjoyed being with the children. The children also had a great time with their parents, and it was decided to have dinner together. Sukanya felt guilty towards Ramesh, such a good husband, but the touch of another man awakened strange desires in her. She pushed those thoughts away as she prepared for the dinner her husband was going to invite her to. They went to their favorite restaurant, one of the best in the city, famous for its atmosphere and food. As always, they received special attention. Sukanya wore a short-sleeved cotton blouse and a red sari, a gift from her husband. This sari highlighted her elegant beauty perfectly. Many rich and confident men in the restaurant looked at her magnificent figure with admiration, trying to meet her eyes. Sukanya noticed this. Previously, she had ignored such glances, but today her body was trembling with passion. Unbeknownst to her husband and son, she smiled at the tall, broad-shouldered gentleman. And then I mentally scolded myself for it. Many other men noted her long legs and strong thighs, quivering against the shimmering silk of the sari. For the first time, Sukanya enjoyed these views. She noticed that there were also many handsome men around, but she slowly pulled her husband to her side, relegating her fans to the background. She wanted Ramesh to get everyone's attention as she was close to him and talked to him in a romantic manner. She wanted him to be special. They sat in a semi-private booth at a luxury hotel while a waiter served them. Lavi was also a model that many men tried to look like and wanted to attract attention. But as was her habit, she had a good time making fun of her brother. Ramesh, in turn, told his children many funny stories about his work, the many places he had been, and much more. Sukanya kept teasing him about the veracity of his stories, making him draw himself with pride. It was a very funny event that she clearly enjoyed. The waiters serving them clearly saw the figures of Sukanya, as well as her daughter, but the former fascinated them more. Ramesh had no idea how attracted his wife was to fans. The booth was semi-private, so the men sitting around could take a look at her. They tried to look into her eyes, which she tried to avoid, but she failed. Her thoughts revolved around her lover Ranjit and senior office colleague Jaisur. She couldn't handle the fact that in the space of one day she had physical relations with two different men, in her own home. This fact was as surprising to her as it was strangely pleasant. Her son even said, "Mom, you only laugh at Daddy's jokes." At least he has one good supporter. Everyone laughed at this joke. After the snack, she got up and went to the toilet, accompanied by her daughter. They wandered around the large, luxurious hotel, taking pictures in front of the beautiful sculptures and modern architecture of the building. Sukanya was very proud of her daughter, who was not influenced by the modern selfie culture. She had to beg her daughter to have it removed. At least she behaved very well around her. They were returning to their table when Sukanya noticed something out of the corner of her eye and froze for a moment. This sudden surprise gradually gave way to calm, and she said to her daughter, "Honey, go to the table. I'll be back soon." "What happened, Mom?" "Nothing, dear. I need to go to the toilet to straighten my sorry, that's all. Then I'll go with you." "No, honey, it's okay. Go to Dad. Keep him company." Her Lavi nodded and returned to the table. As soon as the girl left, Ranjit approached Sukanya from the hall. Her heart sank at the sight of him. She couldn't suppress the moan of desire that escaped her throat as she looked at his smile. Her body reacted immediately, causing a warm shiver of anticipation. This confident, mature businessman was not only her lover, but also the man she couldn't stop thinking about. "Ranjit, what are you doing here?" "Disappointed to see me?" He grinned. "No, what are you talking about?" I just asked. "Do you remember our hot morning moment?" These words were enough for the desire to appear in her gaze. How could she forget it? At his words, her thighs involuntarily tensed. She wanted so badly to throw herself at him. Ranjit could see perfectly well how her body was reacting to him. She was the embodiment of desire, a mature, seductive woman radiating sensuality. Her chest tightened and her hips moved with grace, making her even more seductive. "My God, I don't know about you, bitch, but it was just a fantastic morning. Your body keeps me in this city. I can't leave without doing this again." These words fueled her even greater attraction to him. She was already licking her lips in anticipation. "Didn't you feel the same, bitch?" She nodded and answered quietly. "I felt it, Ranjit. I knew it. I knew that you wouldn't refuse another meeting." But she shook her head. Even though she really wanted to spend time with him, she said, "You don't understand. My husband is here with me. In fact, my whole family is here. I can't, Ranjit. Believe me, I want this as much as you do, but it is completely impossible." He looked at her and noticed unbridled passion and hunger in her eyes. He understood that she was telling the truth. There were a lot of people walking around. Some glanced at this dazzling beauty talking emotionally with a tall man. Some of the hotel staff recognized her as the woman who came with her husband and family. Now her interaction with this man looked too familiar, even intimate. Ranjit nodded. "I've been waiting for you since the evening. I knew that you would choose this restaurant because it is your favorite. Since then, I have been dreaming about sex with you." She smiled at his words. "Should I take that as a compliment?" "The only thing I want you to accept from me is my body." A shiver ran through her at his words. She looked back to see if anyone had heard. Curiosity flashed in the eyes of one of the bellhops, and for a moment she thought he heard. But this assumption only provoked her. "I would like that too, but we will have to postpone." He smiled at her. "You can compensate for this in another way." "I don't understand." Ranjit looked and smiled at the frail housewife, taking her by the wrist and leading her in the opposite direction from where her family was sitting. As they walked, she noticed how the men were looking at her as she walked next to another man. If they remember that she came earlier with her husband, they will think what a girl of easy virtue she is. She was overcome with fear from these thoughts. She soon realized that her lover was taking her out the back door of the hotel into a narrow alley. There were a few men standing there smoking cigarettes and a few mongrels wandering around sniffing trash cans. Some of the men looked in their direction. The bravest of them whistled quietly, wanting to offend her modesty. Sukanya looked at her feet in embarrassment, ashamed that she was with another man in such a dark alley. He led her further into a narrower alley where there was a niche that only two people could stand in. Any curious person who came here in search of entertainment could see how closely they were standing, huddled together. Sukanya didn't mind his hand resting on her buttocks as she breathed heavily, pressing her breasts against her lover's muscular chest. He stood leaning on the wall and looked at her lustfully. She smiled nervously back at him. Standing in a dark alcove in the alley, Sukanya became increasingly excited as she looked into the eyes of her lover, Ranjit. He looked at her like a hunter looks at his prey. His gaze made her clench her thighs in excitement. She was glad to hug him so tightly, feeling the flame of desire flare up inside her at his touch. She leaned slightly towards him, which caused Ranjit to smile contentedly. "You are a rare specimen, Sukanya." "I admit it," he said, adding to himself, "and yes, now you are completely in my power." Sukanya said, "Ranjit, I think it's better for me to go back to my husband without paying compensation." She giggled. "Okay, tell me, what do I owe you?" She assumed he was hinting at a kiss, although it felt wrong for her to kiss him knowing that her husband was in the same building. She couldn't hide the excitement running through her body at the mere thought of it. She reproached herself for her willingness to give this kiss. Moreover, she knew that this would not be just a light kiss. Smiling confidently, he said, "Give me your bra, honey." "A what?" she gasped. "Look around, Ranjit. We are on the street, in an alley. What if someone sees us?" "Well, I'm willing to take the risk," he replied. She shook her head. "It would be too dangerous for me, honey." There was a plea in her voice. He said, "But I sense courage in you, baby. I know you are one of those who will decide to do this. Even despite your no, there is something naughty, or rather depraved, inside you that makes you think about it again and again." Sukanya was surprised how he read it. She was almost ready to take off her blouse and give him her bra. All she needed was a couple of encouraging words. She giggled hearing his words. She knew she couldn't refuse him. She slowly ran her hands along the fastenings of her blouse, as if pondering his words. Ranjit nodded. "That's it, bitch. I knew you had it in you. Come on, make daddy happy." She slowly began to unbutton her blouse, looking into his eyes as her body trembled with excitement. She knew that she could not resist her lover. His touch drove her crazy with desire all day. Perhaps it was because of his touch that she fell into the arms of Jaisur. Even though it was wrong, she was happy about what happened. She would do it again for such dangerous excitement. Ranjit saw her white bra against her creamy skin as the flaps of her blouse fell to the sides. He kissed her on the lips, to which she responded with a passionate kiss. She no longer cared about the situation around her. She decided to live in the moment. She wanted to remove his hands and button her blouse, but at that moment her phone rang. She replied, "Yes, dear. Yes, I'm on my way. No, nothing. It's just a dress." "No, it's okay, Ramesh. I'll be right there. I just slipped. No big deal. I'm on my way, honey." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, Ranjit, you will kill me with your own hands. My husband. Please, I have to go." Ranjit smiled as he looked at his lustful housewife, whom he held in his arms, brutally squeezing her breasts. But he knew she liked it. She was his special girl, and he couldn't ignore that fact. She kissed him again, slowly tucking her breasts back into her blouse and fastening the buttons. She slipped out of his arms, smiled at him, and waved goodbye, turning around and running back through the alley to the door, hearing the mocking whistle of some beggar after her. Ramesh asked, "Where have you been, dear?" "You were gone for a long time, so I called." "Nothing, Ramesh. Just women's stuff. By the way, this is very tasty. I love this paneer curry." Sukanya nodded and sat down at the table, squeezing her thighs, remembering her secret pranks. All she could think about was running away into the alley again and making love to her lover. When her husband told a joke and the children laughed, she smiled only because no one knew about her secret. No one knew that the stranger had her bra in his pocket, while her beloved Ramesh did not suspect anything. After some time, she pulled herself together and began to enjoy the company of her family. She looked lovingly into the eyes of her husband, who was trying so hard to make her happy, sacrificing his time for the party. She knew she couldn't love anyone more than him. She only wished that their physical relationship would be stronger. She looked into his eyes as he told a funny story at the ATM. But suddenly he fell silent mid-sentence, looking at something at their table. Sukanya turned around to see what it was. Her heart sank when she saw her lover, Ranjit, standing behind him, beaming with a smile. "Is this Sukanya?" She didn't know what to say. She looked at her husband, who was half smiling and half puzzled by what was happening. She just nodded, not knowing what to do next. Ranjit smiled confidently and said, "Don't you remember me?" She continued to look at him silently, trying not to give herself away, but she did not know how to behave in such a situation. "I was at the hospital where you worked a few years ago. My uncle was hospitalized there, and I had to settle some bills, and you helped me." She nodded slowly, feeling the blood return to her face. Ramesh simply smiled, not having the slightest idea what was being discussed. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." Sukanya felt the same. Ranjit continued, "Anyway, I was here with some friends, we were saying goodbye, and I noticed you sitting here and thought I should just wave hello. Sorry to bother you." Ramesh responded with his usual politeness. "What are you talking about? There is no concern. Have a seat." Sukanya felt heat engulf her neck due to Ramesh's invitation. She imagined what he would do when he found out about the antics in the alley. She half-restrainedly turned her giggle into a cough. She nodded too. Yes, sir. I remember you. Have a seat." Ranjit shook his head as if embarrassed. No, I don't want to impose." "You are not in the way, sir, please," Ramesh replied politely. He immediately understood from the man's appearance that he was a rich and successful businessman. A formal suit and tie spoke for themselves. Ranjit slid into the empty seat. "No, really, sorry. It seems like you are having a family celebration, and—" Ramesh smiled. "Oh, it's Sukanya's birthday, sir." Ranjit raised his eyebrows as if surprised and said, "Really? Happy birthday to you. I should give you something, but—" Sukanya smiled, looking into her lover's eyes, anticipating his prank. "Or at least buy you something to drink?" His direct gaze sent a shiver of desire through her, sensing the hidden hint in his words. She knew what he was really offering her. He covered himself. "But this is probably family time, and it would be inappropriate to talk about drinks." Ramesh replied, "No, sir, we don't drink." "Sorry, then." "There's nothing to apologize for, sir. So what do you do?" Ranjit spoke in detail about his work and business. Ramesh soon realized that he was not mistaken in his assessment of this man. As it turned out, he was a major developer with branches throughout the country. While Ranjit talked about his activities, Ramesh was clearly impressed by the scale of his business. And for some strange reason, this made Ranjit even more attractive to Sukanya. She looked at him, trying to catch his eye, but he was busy impressing Ramesh. All the events since the morning were scrolling through her head, and her breathing became rapid. The children soon became bored with the adult conversation and found an excuse to stroll around the luxury hotel while the three adults discussed life. What Ramesh thought was a small, kind invitation to their table quickly grew into a long conversation in which each of them talked about their work. Ranjit liked Ramesh's sincerity and openness, who joyfully coped with the difficult task of supporting his family on a modest income. The developer sincerely admired how this man managed to not only cover all the needs of his family, but also save to buy an apartment. And his heart was filled with deep sympathy for Sukanya, who did not complain about the restrictions, but supported her husband and rejoiced at what he was doing for her. She was truly beautiful, especially when she looked at him with such obvious attraction. "You know what, Ramesh, I'm really impressed with you and your business. Perhaps I would like to invest in your store. I can help you open it in a better location and completely renovate the interior for a small percentage of the profit." Ramesh smiled. He understood that this man was generously offering him help. For such a big businessman, this was a small thing. But the only thing Ramesh had in abundance was pride. He shook his head. "No, sir. I'm happy with everything, and I'm already planning to update my place." Ranjit admired the man's self-respect. He felt the light touch of Sukanya's graceful leg on his ankle. When he looked into her eyes, she gave him a greedy look. Ranjit smiled to himself at her courage right in front of her husband. But Ramesh's attention was elsewhere. Ranjit took off his sock and shoe and began quietly playing footsie with the beauty. He especially liked it when she massaged his foot while continuing to talk casually with her husband. She stroked the inside of his leg, and he secretly sent her smiles. "You are a very beautiful couple. I'm glad I met you tonight," he said as he said goodbye. "So do we," Ramesh smiled politely. "And you are truly a lucky man, Ramesh. This woman is wonderful. I realized this even when she helped me. Anyone would be glad to have such an employee in their office. By the way, I'm ready to offer her a job in one of the branches of my business here in the city." Sukanya now understood why he came. She looked into his eyes intently, trying to understand his motives. Ranjit seemed to open up to her, shrugging his shoulders as a sign that everything was up to her. Ramesh shook his head. "It's not my decision. She herself knows what is best for her to do." Sukanya felt a deep wave of love for her husband for his words of encouragement. He always encouraged her professionally. He looked at her as if he was waiting for her comment on the proposal. She asked Ranjit, "What kind of proposal, sir?" He explained that it was a job at his real estate agency, part secretarial and part bookkeeping. In his brief description, there was not a single point that she could criticize. And at the end, when he mentioned the salary, Sukanya was pleasantly surprised. This was 3 times her current salary. He pretended to value her talent over her looks, but she knew the truth. He was more concerned with getting her into bed. Ramesh was amazed that his wife could be rated so highly. However, he was proud of her. Ranjit knew very little about her professional skills. He was simply looking for the most beautiful woman to sleep with and keep her by his side whenever he needed it. He also realized that Sukanya would probably be tempted. This became obvious from the noticeably strong pressure of her leg, which was apparently the result of excitement. Sukanya, however, found herself in a dilemma. She didn't like that he valued not her work, but her body. She was filled with desire, but also with anger. A powerful man, her lover, could do whatever he wanted to her, and she could only accept it. Is it supposed to be like this? She felt a rebellion inside her. Things would be so much better if he actually valued her intelligence and not her lips, mouth, and everything else. Ramesh said, "I think I'm not the right person to judge, but probably your field of activity and his work are completely different. Well, his company seems to be big, and you're just an accountant." The last words hurt Sukanya. She looked at her husband with irritation as he was busy eating on his plate. Ranjit noticed this and smiled. "Yes, maybe," he agreed. "Perhaps she is not suitable. I don't know, I just suggested. But you are right, the spheres are really different." Sukanya felt angry at Ramesh for his words. He didn't want to offend her, but it was one of those involuntary remarks that hurt. "I may be ready to take on the job, sir," she said. Ramesh looked at her, feeling proud of her stubborn courage. Ranjit wanted to get the best out of his beloved. "But there are also disadvantages, Sukanya. You may have to travel to another city once every month or two to attend meetings, to present account analyses, and so on." Sukanya understood what he was getting at. On the one hand, she knew that her lover was trying to lure her into work, which was a cover for their affair. On the other hand, she felt challenged that she could handle it and make something worthwhile out of this work, even though it might just be sitting at a desk and showing her presence. She nodded. "I don't have a problem with this if Ramesh doesn't have any." Ramesh shrugged. "Traveling to another city once a month is a burden, but it all depends on your desire, dear. If you think you can handle it and want it, I don't mind. Although you hate traveling, this is probably not your thing." "I don't mind traveling," Sukanya said, to Ramesh's surprise. "So I agree with this job." Ranjit smiled and said, "Well, is everything decided then?" In any case, I will give you time to think it over, Sukanya. Discuss this with your husband and get back to me in a couple of weeks. Besides, I haven't fully settled here yet. My offices are in the northern part, but I'm thinking of moving them here, which will take a few months. He smiled at her, pressing her foot, and then put on his shoes and stood up. He said goodbye to them. Ramesh shook his hand and Sukanya winked at Ranjit while her husband was not looking. When they left the restaurant at 9:30, Sukanya was still thinking about Ranjit's proposal. She understood that this was good money and she needed to accept it. Her thoughts returned to how her body responded to sex. She seemed to crave him more than ever. She was pleased that if she got this job, her lover would be available to her regularly. This thought alone excited her. When she checked her phone, there was already a message from Ranjit. After making sure that Ramesh was busy, she read, "Get ready to make your body available to me, bitch. You'll get what you crave on a regular basis." Sukanya smiled. She almost wrote, "Looking forward to this," but stopped herself. She deleted the message and smiled to herself, remembering the events of the day. Ranjit gradually conquered her body and thoughts. That night, after returning home, she tried to have sex with her husband. As usual, he did not live up to her expectations. Although she was not completely satisfied, she still felt good. He finished after a few minutes as she continued to move her hips. She excused herself to go to the bathroom and finish herself off without telling her husband. Lying next to him, Ramesh asked, "This man seems normal. Are you sure you want to take this job?" "I'll think about it, Ramesh. A little extra money wouldn't hurt us. We still have a loan for a new apartment." "Yes, you're right, dear. I'll do a little check on your friend. It's not that I don't trust him, but it's better this way, right?" "Absolutely." The next day, as Sukanya was getting ready to go to work, she was incredibly ashamed that she would have to meet Jai Sir. She behaved so obscenely with the older man that when she woke up in the morning and after a cold shower, when her senses were a little dull, she realized how vulgar her behavior was. She did not understand why the touch of her lover made her a slave to these carnal desires. Her behavior had always been reserved and decent, but in a matter of hours it completely changed. She did not think about it for long, because at night she felt so calm and pleasant when she plunged into sensual pleasures with her beloved. It was really clouding her mind. Was he clouding her mind, or was it perhaps his body that was affecting her in such a powerful way? She wanted, like in a movie, to rewind the day and cut out the moment when she spent time with her mentor in the office. In reality, where everything should have been more practical, she realized that she had made a huge mistake. She wanted to apologize to him for her behavior and promise that it wouldn't happen again. What will the old man say? Will he say that he is disappointed in her? Although he didn't seem to mind when he allowed himself such bold gestures. The thought of this sparked a playful idea in her mind, and she noticed her body starting to react again. But then she thought about the other side of this situation. The man may have already come to his senses and is now condemning her for her humiliating behavior. These thoughts filled her with shame. At breakfast, she felt tears welling up in her eyes. She felt like she had ruined their friendship forever. Her husband was too busy to notice her condition. The children had already left home, and he simply praised her culinary skills while continuing to eat breakfast. He drove her to the bus stop, but thoughts about what happened haunted her the whole way. Jai also felt uneasy about their future relationship. Sukanya was such a beautiful girl in his eyes. He blamed everything on the lustful Lakshmana, who, he believed, ruined everything. He saw the sincerity in her apology, but he also felt unusually close to her after their physical intimacy. When he recalled what had happened, he felt deep pity for Sukanya. It seemed to him that she, like a girl, joyfully spent time with him when he was the first to take the initiative, seeing her seductive naked hips and allowing himself to touch. He understood that it was he who awakened in her these sensual emotions and awkwardness, which she obviously would not have felt for someone like him. He felt that he had betrayed her. He forced her to do something she would never have done under normal circumstances. Jai wanted to apologize to her before it ruined their friendship. He was afraid of meeting her again. When he reached the office, He noticed Sukanya sitting in her seat. She didn't even look up when he entered the room. It became clear to him from her behavior that she felt his presence. He sat down at his computer, and she seemed busy with the numbers on her monitor, although he knew she wasn't. It was hard for him. He really regretted what happened. That didn't mean he didn't enjoy their closeness. He would be deceiving himself if he said that it was not a pleasure to see this incredible beauty. But what did all this lead to? It ruined everything. During lunch, he heard her talking to a colleague and saying that she was thinking about moving to another organization. Then he realized that he had ruined everything. He destroyed everything good they had. Jai decided that he should apologize, and if he was the cause of her suffering, then it was better for him to leave his job, not for her. He was waiting for her at the end of the working day at the scooter parking lot. As she passed by on her way to the bus stop, he called out to her. Sukanya. Sukanya's heart skipped a beat with shame and guilt. She glanced at him, but immediately lowered her eyes, unable to meet his gaze. Sir? Her voice was quiet. Listen, honey, I'm really sorry about what happened yesterday. I don't want you to suffer. She looked at him in surprise. What are you talking about, sir? I understand that I made a big mistake, Sukanya. I think I shouldn't have done what I did yesterday and made you feel bad about it. Jaya's words touched her heart. She realized how much he was worried. In the morning, she could not muster the courage to look him in the eyes. She was ashamed that she had disappointed him. But he seemed to see things differently. Jai continued. I destroyed everything we had until yesterday. We had such a good friendship. Every day, knowing you would be in the office made me feel good. And now I think we can never go back to this. I really regret allowing myself physical intimacy. It was a mistake. If this bothers you, I'm ready to quit my job. Please tell me if there is anything I can do to make things better. With these words, he left, leaving her shocked. She didn't expect such a turn. It seemed to her that she was to blame for what happened, but he took full responsibility upon himself. On the one hand, she felt relieved to know that he did not hold a grudge against her, but it hurt her to see him suffer. For the next 3 days, he did not speak to her, did not look into her eyes. Jai tried not to disturb her, only interacted with her about work, and left the office as quickly as he could. Sukanya also remained silent, thinking that it would be better this way, but his ignorance of her presence was starting to hurt. Sukanya also remained silent, believing that it was better not to aggravate the situation. But the way he ignored her presence gradually began to hurt her. He was a kind soul to her in the office, always asking about her and her family. This atmosphere clearly lacked the former friendliness, and this made her feel sad. Gradually, all this began to depress her, this game of cat and mouse. She couldn't understand why their relationship was so fragile that they couldn't hold on to each other after such a minor incident. She believed that their friendship was much more important than this petty quarrel. But looking deep into her subconscious, she realized that her depression had another reason. As this thought gained clarity, it began to take root more and more. This idea was painfully simple. Sukanya wondered if she was not beautiful enough for him to reconsider what had happened and want to return to the previous relationship. If this man is avoiding her, then he definitely does not feel any deep attraction to her. But Ranjit craved her body. He had been talking to her since the day they met in the restaurant. There was a primal passion in his voice. He never ceased to imagine it underneath him, even during telephone conversations. He told her how crazy he was about her figure, how she haunted his thoughts. Another thing is that Sukanya's thoughts often returned to Ranjit and his desires. But she couldn't stop thinking about how easily Jai Sir had forgotten the pleasure her body gave him. She was always considered beautiful. Behind her modest personality was a confidence in her own attractiveness, and she suddenly wondered if she was being too arrogant about her beauty. She reproached herself for being proud of her appearance and convinced herself that perhaps she was not at all what she thought she was. However, after admitting that Jai Sir probably didn't find her that attractive, she couldn't accept it. She wanted to prove to him that she was the one with whom he should certainly strive for physical intimacy. But Jai Sir did not change his attitude. He almost completely ignored her. He regretted his mistake and didn't want the situation to get out of control. If they crossed paths, he nodded politely. In general discussions, he answered her only as needed, but the former friendship between them was no longer there. Sukanya missed this. Her competitive spirit motivated her to try to repair their friendship, but he acted like a recluse. Ramesh asked her several times why she looked so depressed. She smiled and replied that it was because of work stress, a convenient lie. But after 10 days, she couldn't take it anymore. At night, she regularly initiated intimacy with Ramesh, but he could not satisfy her desires. She gave him pleasure, seduced him, but he became more and more indifferent. Although her love for him did not fade, her burning desire drove her crazy. She regularly corresponded with her lover, but despite this, she wanted that cordial communication that was between her and the person with whom she was in contact. Her habit of self-pleasure intensified, and now she did it not only at night, but also during the day. Her thoughts went back to the moments with Ranjit and that brief episode with Jai Sir. She wanted to run naked to her lover, forgetting about everything. Her modesty, which she adhered to in society, contrasted sharply with the inner passion flaring up in her soul. She was looking for materials related to sex on the internet. If earlier she strictly controlled herself when watching adult films, now she has become less restrained. She reproached herself for this obsession, but could not do anything about it. A mother of 2 teenagers and a devoted homemaker, she felt she should be more responsible. But her sensuality and desire for sex made her think that she should approach the situation with Jai Sir in the most atypical way for her. After her husband left home, she wore a salwar kameez, which was very old, and which she used to wear to please Ramesh. When their daughter Lavi was just a 3-year-old child, she wore this outfit for Ramesh in the bedroom. This salwar kameez was very tight and showed off her slender figure. The fabric was green cotton with red horizontal patterns, and there was a purple collage pattern on the chest. But the main thing about this outfit was the front and back styles. Her beautiful breasts were greatly accentuated by this tight dress. Over the past few years, her bust size had increased from a C to a D, and when she put on this outfit and looked in the mirror, she couldn't help but be happy with how impressive her breasts looked. The deep cutout on the square collar made her especially proud of her figure. A light lace at the neckline added even more piquancy to her look. The back was also almost completely open, with lacing running from the lower back to the shoulders. The salwar hugged her slender hips, adding to her captivating beauty. She spent a lot of time styling her hair in wavy curls that fell softly down her back and chest. She put on light makeup because this was always enough for her to attract male attention. Here is a slightly modified version of the text to avoid explicit scenes. At first, she was wary of wearing a dress. At the office, she preferred to dress very conservatively, but something inside pushed her to change. She wanted to change her image and mentally smiled at the upcoming experiment. If Ramesh knew about her decision, he would be very surprised, because he always saw his reserved and decent wife in her. When she entered the office, the reaction from her colleagues was expected. She covered the top of her dress with a dupatta, but her new style was visible to everyone. Lakshman and Anand immediately noticed the changes in the image of their colleague. Lakshman could not help but look surprised as he assessed the new clothes. Anand approached her several times with questions about work, clearly interested in the changes. Lakshman also passed by her table several times, trying to carry on the conversation. Sir Jai jerked his head slightly as he looked at Sukanya's stunning figure. He was momentarily taken aback by the style of her dress. He felt a little angry and a little jealous that these 2 lechers would see her too. But he tried to mind his own business, which turned out to be very difficult. Even her female colleagues praised her looks and dress. Sukanya tried to gauge Sir Jai's reaction. Although she had hoped for his initial reaction, when he gradually returned to his work, she was disappointed. She felt that he would come and talk to her. She felt that he would be attracted to her beauty. She was going to prove herself wrong. Her competitive mind forced her to take the next action. She made this bold decision. She wasn't going to lose him. She asked Lakshmana, "Sir, can you help me find some files in the storeroom?" Of course, Sukanya, why not? Lakshman was very pleased with her request. What he wanted was privacy with the lady. His eyes scanned her sheer dupatta at her cleavage. This MILF has been playing in his dreams for quite some time. Her wonderful long legs and her superb busty beauty suffocated him with an exotic feeling. Sukanya noticed Sir Jai turn his neck towards them, but then slowly returned to his computer. Sukanya took the risk of inviting Lakshman into the room, but was in despair. She smiled at Lakshmana more than necessary as he was delighted with her support. He didn't notice the older man's glances at the couple. Sukanya noticed him and was happy to note that he was angry. Despite all his ignoring, she felt a certain vengeance when she looked at the expression on his face. She went with Lakshman to the storeroom. Lakshman did not pretend to touch her after he entered the room. He walked next to her so that his thighs touched hers. Although Sukanya tried to distance herself, she noticed how persistent he was. She felt fear as she entered the room. She remembered how he had behaved with her before. She realized that this mission was not without danger. However, Lakshman was in seventh heaven with self-confidence, hitting him in the gut. While Sukanya was busy searching for the file he needed, he was looking at the superb profile of a hot MILF. He couldn't believe she was a mother of 2 teenagers. The salwar camis she was wearing indicated that she was around 25 years old. In his eyes, she looked like a fresh girl of easy virtue. Her heaving bust with her seductive cleavage behind her sheer dupatta was making him aroused. He slowly placed his hands on her thin stomach as she jerked. Even though she hated his touch, physical contact turned her on. She became a slave to the memories of her lover. She noticed the pressure of Lakshman's hand on her thighs, trying to pull away. He slowly ran his hand over her curvy ass as she said, "Sir, please, we shouldn't do this." However, Lakshman was not afraid. He slapped her on the butt and said, "I know why you called me here, Sukanya. You were looking forward to a repeat of what happened between us a few days ago before we were interrupted by that old man. I didn't know you liked it so much." He loved the soft flesh of her gorgeous ass and kept pressing into it. Sukanya gasped as her colleague patted her firmly on the back. She slowly removed his hand. She hid her desire for sex by turning away from him. "You have a very wrong idea about what happened that day, sir. I really didn't like what happened between us. I don't want this to happen again." "Then why did you dress up for me, baby?" "I saw how you decorated your cleavage with a knot of rope." He looked at her as she lowered her eyes. Her presence caught his attention, and she felt his gaze. She liked that he was impressed, but knew she preferred to keep things more businesslike. "Forgive me if I misunderstood your interest, sir, but I really want you to know that I don't like what you're doing," she said firmly. Lakshman ignored her words and instead pulled her closer and tried to hug her. She tried to push him away, feeling mixed emotions. There was something exciting about it, but at the same time she experienced strong internal resistance. He lightly touched her shoulder, which made her feel conflicted, but she knew she couldn't let it go any further. What a special woman, he thought. She was perfect from head to toe. He needed to have her. Her petite and slender body seemed like a toy in his hands as he turned her around and pulled her in for a hug. She felt his medium size pressing against her buttocks. Although she was suddenly aroused by his movement, she had a slight giggle in her throat as she compared his size to her lover's Ranjit and Jaisur. He was definitely average, like her husband, maybe about 5 inches. But she struggled, trying to free herself from his hands. She knew she had made a mistake by bringing him here. When he tried to touch her breasts again, Jaisur's sharp voice was heard. "What are you doing, Lakshman?" The old man stood a few steps away from them, and anger burned in his eyes. Sukanya was relieved that he had finally intervened. She liked the old man's dominant nature. He reminded her of a fierce lion. Lakshman did not show submission, unlike last time. "I was just helping her find the file, sir. I know what you were trying to do. Look, sir, if you have any doubts, you can ask her. In fact, she herself asked me to come." Jai looked at her. Sukanya met his gaze defiantly. For a moment, she had the urge to run to him, hug him, and offer him everything he wanted, but she held it in, choosing to ignore him the same way he ignored her. She said, "It's true, sir. I asked Lakshman to help me find the file. What irritated Jay-Z the most was that Sukanya stood next to Lakshman while she was saying this, and he couldn't help but notice how her curved hips accidentally touched another man's hand. He snorted angrily, turned on his heel, and walked away. Lakshman said, "Well done, girl. Come on, we have unfinished business." She looked at him with a serious look that Lakshman had never seen before, and this seriously alarmed him. Her gaze almost made him run away. She had always been so soft and caring, but now there was something in her eyes that he never expected to see. "We have nothing more to discuss, sir. I think you better leave me alone. Otherwise, you will regret your actions." Lakshman lost all his sexual spirit. He looked like an animal whose tail had been pinched and was in complete confusion. Her ultimatum took away all his courage. Sukanya left the room to her office. She didn't even look at the older man as she went back to her work. Although Jai was angry with her, his anger turned to worry when he saw her serious look. She didn't smile all day, she just went about her business. She left for lunch without paying any attention to him. Jai became increasingly worried that he may have jeopardized their friendship. But why was he angry? She was hugging this bully. Jealousy stung him like a snake, but he could not forget the day when they were so close. He tried to be close to her all evening, but she barely paid attention to him. Her ignoring him slowly turned into his nervous restlessness. He wanted to talk to her, but she did not give him this opportunity. He gradually realized that he had probably behaved the same way towards her in recent days. Was she trying to piss him off with her behavior, her sexy clothes, and flirting with this clown? Her demeanor made him increasingly uneasy about his position next to her. He almost got her that day, and she was so accommodating. What about her behavior the next day and her decision to leave the company? Wasn't this proof that she regretted her actions? The only thing that could calm his anxiety was a frank conversation with her. Yes, that was the only thing that could help. At the end of the working day, he was waiting for her in the parking lot and offered her a ride. "No, thank you, sir. Listen, Sukanya, I wanted to talk to you about something." "Sorry, sir, I'm in a hurry." She tried to be short and sharp with him. She was giving him a taste of his own behavior. "That won't work. Your restraint must cease." She looked at him angrily, and it shook him. "What about your silence, sir? You have been mute for the past few days, ignoring me as if I had a skin disease. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't think I can bother you with my company anymore." Jai bit his tongue but said, "I'm sorry if I offended you, Sukanya. But what about what happened in the archives today?" Sukanya felt ashamed of her behavior, but tried to remain defiant. "What about this, sir? Why do you care how I behave? I'm probably the person you think should be ignored. I am the type of person who deserves your contempt, am I not? You were probably disappointed in my behavior a few days ago." These words caused a sudden rush of blood in him. He got horny in a matter of seconds. The only thing he remembered about that day was her magnificent breasts. What a couple they were. He was ready to do anything to see and feel them again. He understood that he had sinned by his behavior that evening. But now he realized that the real sin was not enjoying what was before his eyes. The way she was dressed today made him want her again. This innocent housewife could give him an unforgettable time. Her words came as a surprise to him. From the way she spoke, he knew that she was the initiator, but she was disappointed by her own behavior. In a way, she meant to say that she didn't suit his tastes. It hurt him. The desire he felt for her and the attraction he felt that evening came back to him in an instant. Tears sparkled in Sukanya's eyes. It really hurt her to know that she was losing his friendship because of their physical intimacy. It was hard for her that they found themselves in such a situation where they had to explain themselves and argue. But at the same time, she felt something tender and passionate for this man. She felt it a few days ago. He was courageous and confident in the way he moved and spoke. He was a brave man who stood up for her, and also a confident leader who handled his responsibilities in the office well. It was these qualities that attracted her to him, and the intimacy that happened a few days ago seemed to become a sexual stimulant for her. She easily succumbed to his touches and responded to him in a fit of passion. Her body was starting to show her arousal. Jai spoke, his voice muffled and low. "We can't discuss this here on the street. Come on, I'll take you home." "No, I." His response was more of a growl that sent fear through her, but also a strange excitement. "No talking. I'll take you home." She lowered her head and followed him as he started the car. She sat in the back, trying to act as submissive as possible. While he was driving, she tried to keep her distance from him so as not to anger him even more. He said, "Sit down normally. No need to fight the movement of the car. I don't want you to fall." She smiled, feeling his care behind her, and gradually relaxed her body, as when she was sitting with her husband on a motorcycle. Jai took a deep breath of satisfaction as her body touched his back, as if she was sitting comfortably on the back seat of his scooter. Sukanya also smiled, wiping away a tear, and pressed her chest against his back, sometimes changing her position depending on the movement of the vehicle. This could have been one of the best trips of her life. She longed for a real man's touch. Her husband no longer aroused in her the same feelings that Ranjit or Jai Sir aroused. She gradually turned into a fragile and controllable creature in their arms, and she loved the feeling. She wanted her body to belong to men who, in her opinion, deserved her figure. Gradually, she realized that her figure was what many men dreamed of. They reached home. As Sukanya got off his scooter, she noticed several female neighbors watching her. They did not miss her closeness with Jai Sir. This made her happy and excited. She felt good being around such a dominant man. Although the looks of her neighbors were full of condemnation, she only smiled inwardly. This petty malice caused her additional anxiety. "Won't you invite me inside?" Jai asked, and she nodded timidly. "Please come in." They entered the house, and the silence that hung for a few seconds allowed both of them to realize their inner feelings. "Sukanya, I'm sorry if I offended you these last few days," Jai began. "I assure you, I didn't mean to cause you discomfort in any way. All I have felt for you throughout our professional life is only respect and nothing more." Sukanya looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity in his words and the care with which they were spoken. "I never wanted any misunderstanding to arise between us." Sukanya nodded. "I apologize too, sir. I think it's better to leave bygones in the past. We will not go back to what happened and will try to avoid it in the future." These words came to her with difficulty. She really enjoyed being in his arms, but she wanted to preserve their friendship. For Jaya, it was even more painful. He nodded. He looked at her beautiful figure in salwar. Narrow hips, magnificent breasts, and elastic ass, it was all so close, but he missed it all. He almost shook his head in annoyance, but nodded respectfully in response. What an amazing figure, and he lost it. Her smile filled his heart with light and the space around him with warmth. Her joy had such a powerful effect. She was a magnificent woman, a pleasure to be around, and, if you were lucky, to enjoy her company. She turned on her heel to make the coffee. Watching her swaying gait, he felt how excitement covered him with renewed vigor. Her graceful neck and the profile of her seductive breasts made his heart skip a beat. Sukanya suddenly felt someone's hands on her waist, and with a joyful thrill, she realized that it was Jai Sir who had put his big arms around her and pulled her towards him. Her body responded instantly, feeling his arousal pressing against her buttocks. The next moment, she took a deep breath, enjoying this erotic feeling. Yes, this was exactly the kind of close contact she craved. She loved how Ranjit and now Jai Sir hugged her. She felt the man kissing her neck and moaned quietly with pleasure and yearning desire. His kisses hit the most sensitive places on her neck, and she seemed to be rising to seventh heaven. Her body disappeared into his arms, and strong arms supported her breasts from below, as if her weight was no longer felt. She leaned back easily into his arms, enjoying the moment. The suddenness of the situation increased her happiness. She didn't understand what made her mentor claim her again. Jai was not going to let this woman go so easily. Her stunning figure aroused an uncontrollable passion in him. She was the epitome of sensuality in her outfit. Her natural beauty and mannerisms made him give in to his instincts. When he hugged the young housewife and pressed himself against her, kissing her neck, He experienced the best feeling of his life. "I can't let you go, Sukanya. I want your body," he whispered in her ear. "Oh, sir, I like what you do. Don't stop," she moaned. "Oh, bitch, you almost killed me today with your beauty." She laughed softly when she heard his words. The word bitch was said in a fit of passion, and he almost regretted it, but her laughter only increased his desire. She allowed him to call her as if she gave him the right to completely possess her. "What did I do, sir?" she said. She loved being with him in this fit of passion. She exposed her neck to him, which he again began to cover with kisses. "Your outfit almost killed me. You were dressed like a real seductress." I'm glad you liked my slutty outfit," she drawled and screamed when he bit her earlobe. "I liked it. I just didn't like the way that bastard looked at you." Through moans and eyes closed with pleasure, she whispered. "He can watch, but only you will get everything." His excitement increased at her words. "You have amazing breasts and a great ass, darling. I never thought I'd say this to you." She looked into his eyes as he momentarily moved his face away from her neck. She said softly, "Thank you," and then, looking into his eyes, she kissed him slowly. He didn't hesitate to kiss her back, and it turned into a deep, passionate kiss. She liked his persistence and roughness that was felt in this kiss. This told her of his passion for her body. At the very edge of the bed, Jai turned her towards him, looked into her eyes, and said, "I have never experienced anything like this in my life." She kissed his lips, and he kissed her back. "I'm not saying that I didn't love my wife. I loved her, and we had a wonderful sex life when we were younger, but you are truly special." His gaze slid down, lingering on the neckline of her camis, and he met her smile. She loved the way he looked at her cleavage. He hugged her, running his hands over her rounded hips, which always delighted him. "You are special too, sir," she moaned. She liked his touch. She ignored his gray hair and kissed him as if he were her young lover. She was aroused by his strong body, the result of hard physical labor on the farm in his youth. She stroked his strong muscles with her soft, gentle fingers. He slowly reached for the string of her tight salwar, and she let him. As she took off his shirt, she noticed the gray hair on his chest and began to cover his broad chest with kisses, caressing his strong shoulders. He looked into her eyes, full of passion. Squeezing her hips and pinching her slightly, he allowed her to remove his shirt completely. He gently laid her down on the bed, kissing her again, and she surrendered to his kisses, not thinking that this was her marital bed, and not once thinking about her husband. While kissing, he whispered, "Sukanya, are you sure this is right?" "What, sir? Am I not making a mistake by forcing you to betray Ramesh?" She smiled at him. "I don't know, sir. What worries me is not that I'm cheating on my husband. What bothers me is that I don't feel guilty about it. The only thing I think is that Ramesh would probably support my happiness." This was enough for Jaya. He squeezed her breasts over the thin fabric of her camis and bra. She arched, moaning as his hands confidently slid over her body. She gave herself to him without reserve. Her body longed for intimacy. She was ready. She wanted to be taken completely, without reserve, meeting her rawest and deepest desires. "Take everything off, bitch," he ordered. Sukanya stood by the bed, wrapped in the soft light coming through the curtains. She slowly took off her sari, looking carefully at Jaya, who was sitting on the bed, slightly leaning against the pillow. His eyes beamed with admiration. He could not take his eyes off her graceful movements. He stood up and walked closer, gently touching her shoulder. His touch was gentle, almost timid, but there was genuine sincerity in it. "You look amazing," he said quietly. Sukanya smiled. She felt confident and free at that moment, as if all her worries had disappeared. Her heart was pounding as he leaned in to hug her. Their gazes crossed, and in this silence words were unnecessary. "Have you been wanting to tell me something for a long time?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Jai nodded, then sat down on the bed and invited her to sit next to him. They started talking about life, about work, about how sometimes it is difficult to find time for themselves among everyday worries. The conversation was light, but there was a feeling of something unknown between them. You are always so strong and confident, Jai noted, but I see that you have something heavy in your soul. Sukanya looked at him and nodded slowly. Sometimes I think I'm confused, she admitted. In the family, in work, in yourself. But in your company I feel like myself. His words and sincere tone calmed her. They continued the conversation, openly sharing their thoughts and experiences. The atmosphere between them was saturated with warmth and trust. You know, Jai began, life can be complicated, but moments like this remind you that there is beauty and simplicity in it. Sukanya smiled, feeling that there was truth in his words. Their conversation lasted until the evening, until the clock reminded them that it was time for them to leave. But in these few hours, they understood each other better than many in years. As she left his house, Jai walked her to the door and said, "You are special. Don't forget this." She smiled back at him and, leaving, felt that this evening had changed something inside her. Not something grand, but important. The feeling of being heard and understood filled my heart with joy. Sukanya returned home with a slight smile on her face. Her thoughts were still occupied with her evening conversation with Jai. This conversation was so easy and relaxed that it reminded her how important it is to take time for herself, her emotions and desires. Entering the house, she saw her husband Ramesh, who was enthusiastically watching the news. He glanced at his wife, noticing her slightly elevated mood. "How was your day?" he asked, looking away from the screen slightly. "Okay," Sukanya replied, putting away her things. "We had a meeting with colleagues, and then I stayed a little late in the office. How are you?" "As always, nothing new," he shrugged. "Tomorrow we have a meeting again. How are you? What are your plans?" "Jai, our boss, offered to give me a ride home after work," she noted cautiously. "He said it was on his way." Ramesh did not attach any importance to this. "It's convenient. You can trust him. He is a reliable person." Sukanya nodded, surprised at how calmly her husband reacted to her words. She was a little worried that her interactions with Jai were getting closer, but she wasn't sure yet where this might lead. The next day, Sukanya finished work a little later than usual. When she left the office, Jai was already waiting for her in his car. The smile on his face was so sincere that she couldn't help but feel warm. "Tired day?" he asked, opening the door for her. "A little, but I can handle it," she answered, getting into the car. During the trip, they talked again. The topics they covered became increasingly personal. Jai shared his thoughts about life, about how difficult it is sometimes to be heard, and how difficult it is to find a truly loved one. "Sometimes I feel like I'm stuck in some kind of vicious circle," he said. "Home, work, responsibilities, and where am I? Do you ever feel something like this?" Sukanya thought about it. Her own life was similar. She loved her family, but in recent years she lacked time for herself. "Yes," she admitted. "Sometimes it seems that I have lost touch with myself. I don't even remember the last time I did something just for my own pleasure." Jai nodded, understanding her feelings. "Maybe we should try something new. Find time for yourself, do something unexpected. This can help restore balance." The idea seemed interesting to Sukanya. They agreed to think about it and discuss it later. In parting, he said, "You deserve happiness, Sukanya. Don't forget this." Several days passed. Sukanya noticed how something long forgotten was gradually returning to her life. She began to spend more time doing her favorite activities, reading books, drawing, and even walking in the park. Jai seemed to become her inspiration, although she understood that their relationship could be dangerous. One evening, when they were driving home again, he suggested, "Maybe you want to go somewhere this weekend, just to take your mind off things. I know a quiet place outside the city. You can have a small picnic." Sukanya thought about it. The idea was attractive, but she knew it might raise questions from her husband. However, something inside her pushed her to agree. "I'll think about it," she answered, smiling. Jai nodded, respecting her hesitation. He didn't want to push, realizing that the decision had to be hers. But there was hope in his eyes. Sukanya actually thought about the proposal. She began to analyze her feelings for Jai more. Was it friendship or something more? And how far is she ready to go in this new connection? Each new day brought more and more questions to which she had to find answers. Over the weekend, Sukanya still agreed to go on a picnic with Jai. She explained to Ramesh that this was a corporate event, and he did not ask any further questions. Jai picked her up in the morning, and they headed to a picturesque place outside the city. The atmosphere was calm, and the surrounding nature seemed conducive to frank conversations. They settled down by a small lake, spread a blanket, and began to have a light breakfast. Jai looked at Sukanya carefully, as if trying to read her thoughts. She, in turn, felt a slight excitement their relationship had already gone far enough to be just friendly. "Don't you regret coming?" he asked, pouring her tea. "Not yet," she smiled, feeling his voice calm her down. Their conversation gradually deepened. They discussed the past, dreams, and what was missing in their lives. At some point, Jai touched her hand. "You know, I've been wanting to tell you for a long time," he began, but stopped. "You changed something inside me, made my life brighter. I feel like I can be myself with you." Sukanya lowered her eyes, not knowing how to react. Her heart was beating faster. "Jai," she began, but suddenly their conversation was interrupted by the vibration of the phone. She took it out of her bag and saw that it was a call from Ramesh. She answered hesitantly, trying to sound calm. "Yes, dear? Where are you?" he asked in an unexpectedly harsh tone. "We're at an event with colleagues, you remember," she tried to avoid answering. "Strange. I called the office, and they said there was no event. Can you explain to me what's going on?" Sukanya felt everything inside her break apart. She froze, looking at Jaya, who also tensed, catching the tone of her conversation. I'll call you back," she muttered and quickly hung up the call. Jai looked at her, seeing the confusion on her face. "Was it your husband?" he asked. Sukanya nodded, cupping her face in her hands. She felt backed into a corner. Their little escape was in danger of being exposed. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. Jai, trying to calm her down, gently hugged her shoulders. "You must decide for yourself what you want," he said seriously. "But I don't want you to do anything that would hurt you." These words caused a new flood of emotions in her. She realized how far they had come, and how their connection, which had begun innocently, had become something more. Sukanya stood up, looking at the lake, and tried to collect her thoughts. Her phone vibrated again, but this time she didn't answer. She realized that she now had a choice: either break this connection, which threatened to destroy her family life, or admit to herself that Jai had become more than just a colleague for her. The climax came in the evening when Sukanya returned home. Ramesh sat at the table with a gloomy look. "Where have you been?" he asked as soon as she entered. Sukanya knew there was no point in lying. She took a deep breath and said, "I was with Jai. We went out of town." Ramesh frowned, his gaze filled with suspicion. "Are you saying that this was a business event, or something more?" There was a pause. Sukanya knew that her answer could change their relationship forever. I needed time to figure myself out," she said honestly. "We were just talking, but it helped me understand that there are problems in our family that we are ignoring." Ramesh remained sitting silently, comprehending her words. He wasn't ready to hear it, but deep down he knew she was right. He stood up, approached her, and said, "Then let's figure it out together. You are not alone in this." This moment became a turning point. Sukanya realized that her choice was a chance to save her family and herself. Jai was an important man, but her true happiness lay in regaining the lost intimacy with her husband. After talking with Ramesh, Sukanya could not sleep. His words that they should figure it out together sounded sincere, but her heart remained uneasy. Jai still occupied too much space in her thoughts. The question of how she feels about him has become an insurmountable barrier between her and her usual life. The next day, she received a message from Jaya. "Are you okay? I think you were upset yesterday. If you want to talk, I'm here." She hesitated, but eventually decided to meet. They agreed to meet in a small, cozy coffee shop where they could talk calmly. Sukanya arrived early to prepare for the conversation, but as soon as Jai entered, her resolve wavered. His gaze was warm and understanding, and it made her feel as if she had already been forgiven for anything she might have done. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat down opposite her. "Thank you for trusting me," he replied, leaning closer. Their conversation began with a discussion of recent events. Sukanya tried to explain how confused she was, but Jai seemed to understand everything without further ado. "You shouldn't blame yourself for how you feel," he said. "We cannot control where our heart leads us." These words sounded like permission to do what she was afraid to even imagine. Sukanya felt her inner barrier crumble. They left the coffee shop and walked along the park, where there were few people. At some point, Jai took her hand. She didn't pull it away, although she knew it was wrong. "What are you going to do?" he asked quietly when they stopped near the alley. She was silent, but then unexpectedly said to herself, "Maybe I just need to stop thinking and let myself feel." Jai didn't ask what she meant. Instead, he leaned down and kissed her gently. At that moment, the world around me seemed to disappear. Sukanya felt her worries dissolve in the warmth of his touch. "Are you sure?" he asked, looking into her eyes. She just nodded, her voice locked in her chest. They ended up in his apartment, which he rented not far from his office. The atmosphere between them was both tense and filled with passion. Jai was attentive, giving her the opportunity to stop at any moment, but Sukanya herself pushed things forward. She couldn't ignore her desire any longer. This night was a revelation for her. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive, desired, and free from her usual shackles. They talked, laughed, shared thoughts, and then fell back into passion. Sukanya realized that her connection with Jai was more than just physical attraction. This was what she lacked in her marriage: attention, sincerity, the feeling of being understood. In the morning, looking at him sleeping next to him, Sukanya felt a surge of conflicting emotions. This was the moment of truth. She knew that her relationship with Jai could not last forever, but she also understood that she could not return to her old life as if nothing had happened. When Jai woke up, he saw her thoughtful face. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "About what to do now," she answered honestly. He sat down next to her, took her hand and said, "We can solve this together. You are not alone." But Sukanya knew that ultimately the choice was hers. She must decide what kind of life she wants to live, one that gives her stability or one that allows her to feel free. Sukanya returned to the office earlier this week with mixed feelings. She knew that she had changed her life by taking a step that had previously seemed unthinkable to her. Jai was her refuge from monotony, her secret, her passion. But thoughts about Ramesh, their marriage and family did not let go. In the evening, when she was packing her things to leave, Jai came to her table. "Are you okay?" he asked, carefully studying her face. "Yes, I was just thinking a lot," she answered, trying not to betray her inner turmoil. "Do you want me to give you a ride? We can just talk if you want." She looked at him, realizing that she was drawn not only to his attention, but also to the fire that he had awakened in her. "Okay," she agreed, despite the inner voice pleading with her to be careful. On the way in the car, Jai reached out to her hand again, gently taking her palm. Sukanya did not withdraw her hand, but only squeezed his fingers. They drove in silence, but the silence was saturated with tension. When they reached his house, Jai asked her to come over for tea. Sukanya hesitated, but could not refuse. Her curiosity and desire overcame her guilt. As soon as they entered, Jai pulled her towards him, and their lips met in a passionate kiss. This time Sukanya did not resist. She answered with the same fervor, feeling the warmth spreading throughout her body. His arms slid along her back, gently hugging her. "You're driving me crazy," he whispered, breaking the kiss. Sukanya closed her eyes. Her breathing quickened. She knew this was the wrong way, but she didn't want to stop. She herself pulled him closer, and their kiss became even deeper. They ended up on the couch, and Jai was attentive to her every move. He carefully undid the buttons on her blouse, exposing her shoulders. His fingers gently slid over her skin, causing a slight thrill. Sukanya closed her eyes, allowing herself to be lost in the moment. "You are incredible," he said, gently touching her face. Her hands touched his shirt, slowly tearing it off. She felt relaxed and welcome, as if for the first time in many years her emotions had found an outlet. When their bodies met, everything around them seemed to disappear. Their movements were filled with passion and warmth, which they both needed so much. Sukanya enjoyed every moment, every touch, every whisper he uttered in her ear. Later, lying next to him, she felt a whole whirlwind of emotions sweeping over her. On the one hand, it was amazing, but on the other hand, she knew that reality would soon demand answers from her. Jai, feeling her tension, hugged her, pressing her closer. "You are not alone, Sukanya," he said quietly. "Whatever you decide, I will be there." She looked at him, grateful for his understanding, but deep down she knew that she had a difficult decision ahead of her. Sukanya returned home late, trying not to wake up Ramesh. He was already asleep in their bedroom, and she quietly went into the bathroom to clean herself up. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, she felt divided into two parts. On the one hand, the passion she experienced with Jai was something new for her, almost narcotic. On the other hand, there is a feeling of guilt before Ramesh and fear of destroying the family. She went to bed next to her husband, but could not sleep. Questions flashed through my head. What to do next? How to live knowing that she overstepped her boundaries? Over the next few days, she tried to act as normal. Jai did not rush her or make any demands, but his presence became a comfort to her. They had lunch together several times, talked about life, work, and how difficult it can be to remain honest with yourself. Sukanya felt that it was easier for her to be herself next to him, but the stronger her internal conflict became. One evening, when Ramesh returned from work, he suddenly said, "You've become something different lately. Are you happy?" This question took her by surprise. She looked at him and saw a man with whom she had lived for years, raised children, shared joys and sorrows. And at that moment, she realized that she had to be honest, although the truth could cost her everything. "Ramesh," she began quietly, "I'm not sure. The last few weeks have been difficult for me." He looked at her carefully, but did not interrupt. "I feel like I've lost myself in our life," she continued. "That doesn't mean I don't love you or our family. But I forgot who I am, what I want, and this led to mistakes." His face became tense. "Mistakes? What are you talking about?" She froze, realizing that now she would have to make a choice. She could either tell the whole truth or hide it, trying to save the family. After a long pause, she said, "I think we need to talk to each other more. I don't want any walls between us." Ramesh thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "If you need to say something, say it. I want you to be happy. We can work on this." These words made her burst into tears. He did not accuse her, did not shout, did not demand an explanation. This was the moment when she realized that she still loved him despite everything that had happened. She decided that the truth wouldn't change what had already happened, but it could ruin their future. The next day, she met Jai in the park. They sat down on the bench, and he immediately realized that something had changed. "You decided something, right?" he asked quietly. Sukanya nodded. "Jai, what happened between us is important to me. You gave me the opportunity to feel alive and want it again, but I can't leave my family. I love Ramesh and our children, and I need to try to fix what I destroyed." Jai looked at her with pain, but without anger. He understood that her choice was inevitable. "I understand," he said finally. "You deserve happiness, Sukanya. If it means I have to let you go, I'll do it." He stood up, looking at her with regret. "If you ever need a friend, I'll always be there." Sukanya smiled at him through her tears. "Thank you, Jai, for everything." He nodded and left, leaving her to sit in silence. Her heart was heavy, but she knew she made the right decision. Sukanya returned home with a feeling of relief. She told Ramesh that she would like to spend more time together, go on vacation, and start something new in their life. He supported her, seeing sincerity in her eyes. And although her relationship with Jai remained in the past, she realized that it was a lesson that helped her re-evaluate herself and her happiness. Now she had to rebuild her life, but this time with love, trust, and honesty. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.